Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Spirits and Ghost Stories. I'm your host, Thomas Ahrens.
And I'm Carly Bird.
We are here. We are at week 75. Week 75. That's a big deal. We're getting closer and closer to 100 episodes of Spirits and Ghost Stories. And honestly, this was the first YouTube channel we ever started. It is definitely like the firstborn child. You really don't give a shit about it. You have a couple more because you think they're like pets and you want them to play with each other while you drink, take painkillers, and hope for the release of death. Right? Or am I just relieving some childhood traumas? Who knows?
You are relieving some childhood traumas.
Yeah, but that's what this show basically is basically my little pet project. I like to do this. I can be silly. Don't care if it gets demonetized because it can't even be monetized to begin with. And I get to really kind of scratch that itch of the paranormal and scary things that I really like to watch. Let's see. We got a couple of people watching right now. We got Philip Mehagan. Is that Mehagan? How do you say that?
I would say Mehagan.
Philip Mehagan. Thomas chilling in the group chat. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the feet pics too. I appreciate it. The music is spookier than Kerr 5. Yep, you're right. It is very spookier than Kerr Lake. Or you that one night that you got naked and jumped into the water. That was pretty intense. So Carly, to start out today, we have a really good story, a shark attack story, a very vivid and gory story that actually happened.
Oh my gosh.
And the fact that this guy wrote all this actually scares me a little bit more because you realize how vivid it must have been for him while he watched all this happen. But before we get into that, I thought we could do Scary Thing in the News. So, do you have that for us?
I do. All right.
I will bring this thing up on
my Scary Thing in the News actually goes along really well with the shark attack story. So I'm super excited about that. Basically, my Scary Thing in the News is about mysterious ghost ships that are still being found by the Navy and the Coast Guard. So I have a little bit of backstory here. I'm sorry, I'm going to mispronounce this. But in 1872, the Canadian Brigantine de Gracia was sailing between the Azores Islands and mainland Portugal when it came across a ship 6 miles and closing the distance between them. There was something wrong with the unknown vessel, however. Its sails were off and its movements were erratic at best. As they came closer, the captain of the De Gracia could see no one on its decks and received no signals from its crew. When the crew of De Gracia boarded the ship, they found it deserted, its lifeboat missing, but basically in good order, and filled with supplies. They then found the ship's log, then discovered that it was the Mary Celeste out of New York City. The last entry in the log was 10 days prior and 400 miles away.
Nope.
Mary Celeste was a ghost ship, abandoned at sea and drifting around the ocean without a crew. To this day, no one knows why its crew abandoned the ship. Such a happening seems entirely possible and probable in the days before radio, satellites, and other forms of instant communication, but it is still a relatively frequent occurrence, even with advancements in technology today. Mysterious ghost ships, sometimes called derelicts, have been reported since sailors...
That's where that word comes from.
First took to the seas.
Huh.
Yep, I know, right? Some of these ghost ships are literal ghosts, legends of shipwrecks, and are the reported seen sailing again from time to time. The Flying Dutchman.
Oh, SpongeBob.
Yep. Is one of the ghostly ships of its kind, said to be captained by a spirit condemned to sail forever. Then there are the accounts of real ships found at sea by crews in the way of, just like the De Gracia discovered the Mary Celeste. The HMS Resolute was found derelict by American whalers in the waters off the coast of Nunavut in the Arctic Ocean after a year of being locked in ice. After returning the ship to the Queen Victoria, she gifted a desk made of its timbers made of its timbers. Okay, to who though? I guess the finder of the ship. Anyway, today it's the desk used by the President of the United States in the Oval Office. What?
Isn't that pretty crazy?
It's hard to imagine that ships could still be mysteriously found floating adrift in the days of radio communications, global positioning systems, and long-range identifications and tracking systems. Still, as late as January 2021,
Wow.
ghost ships are still being found floating in the ocean, missing crews under mysterious circumstances.
That's pretty crazy.
Yep.
And what's so funny is like all that still happens to this day where people will come across different ships and things that have actually been lost and they're just still out there. And it really makes you think like how many ships are actually floating around in the ether right now that we don't know about.
Or that have sunk that we don't know about.
There's an unfathomable amount of ships are probably like shipwrecked. But
crazy.
there was another story that Carla and I were looking at because, we do a lot of extensive research. There's a couple for the show. And it was like two men were set adrift for a while. And that might be one that we actually use. So I don't want to spoil it for another scary thing in the news. But it's just like two people just floating in the ocean and like a boat came up to them. I think they're in a refrigerator or something. But it's just like fascinating. Like, yeah. Like how many people are like that? Like you could literally, if you spend a lot of time out in the ocean or fishing or just playing in a jet ski, you could come across a boat and there's a chance there could be somebody in it and it's just adrift.
Yep.
And that's just terrifying.
They're just
to
stuck
me.
out there.
Yeah. And like, so then like the idea of a ghost ship makes sense. Imagine that you're out there at night and you see something like that.
Yeah.
Or you work on an oil rig and you see something like that. That would be terrifying.
Oh my gosh.
Now on the flip side, for some reason, I feel like that would be even worse to actually be stranded and seeing one of those things at night and you're just adrift and you don't know if the thing's going to sink. You don't know if it's going to flip over and you're just at the mercy of the currents. That would be terrifying to me.
Yeah.
And that kind of gets us into today's tale. And just a little background on just kind of shark attacks in general. It's a very prominent problem that we have throughout all of our oceans. And just to give you a few little backdrops and some facts on the species that we shall be talking about today, we're going to be talking about the oceanic whitetip. The oceanic whitetip shark is a fascinating creature found in warm and tropical oceans around the world. Here are some facts about oceanic whitetip sharks. Oceanic whitetip sharks have a distinct appearance with a long, rounded, and broad snout. They have large, round eyes, and their pectoral fins are long and wide, resembling wings. They derive their name from the white tip presented on their dorsal. And what?
They sound pretty.
Yeah, they are a very beautiful shark, and we have some images here that'll show too. Actually, you know what? That's a great idea. That's one thing I love about doing this show. We can always do some pivoting here. Let me get up some.
They sound really pretty. So, this entire time that you're reading this story about whatever the scary shark does to these people, I'm going to be thinking about that TikTok that you sent me recently that was literally uncalled for. I had no idea what kind of gruesome thing I was about to see. It was like some guy like smiling, laughing, and like staring out into the ocean and like pointing into the ocean from a boat. And then it pans over into the water and there's just this arm floating down the water, just cut off like at the elbow, but like shredded. Just shredded. You can see bone and tendon just like floating across the water.
Yeah, I will not be sharing that. I'm sorry, guys.
Well, obviously we're not going to share that because that in itself needed like a gory, like graphic, warning, graphic. And it was not there, did not exist. So I was shocked and traumatized. Oh, it is a pretty shark. Look at that.
So that's what the oceanic whitetip looks like. It's really, there's not a lot to it. It's a very pretty shark, really good dorsal fins, really good pectoral fins on the thing. You usually can get to about 10 to 12 feet in length. A really slow moving shark. And just like its name says, it is a oceanic ship. It's pelagic. Phil would know what pelagic is because it's like a blueback herring or a tuna. They basically stay out in the middle of the ocean and they swim from basically ocean shelf to ocean shelf back and forth. And they usually are scavengers by nature. A very, very fascinating shark.
And what size do they get to be?
They get to be 10 to 12 feet long.
Okay.
And now sometimes they can get 13 feet, but generally no. Females generally being larger than males. The maximum world record ever caught was 14 feet. Ooh. They weighed up to 370 to 400 pounds. These sharks are primarily found in open oceans, preferring warm waters and inhabiting both coastal and pelagic areas. They are commonly sighted in tropical and subtropical regions, including the Atlantic Ocean, Indian Ocean, and Pacific Ocean. Hunting oceanic whitetip sharks are opportunistic feeders, known to consume turtles, birds, carrion, which is basically dead carcass, marine life, and scavenge on anything that comes across their path, including humans. These sharks are solitary creatures and are often found alone in small groups. They are slow swimmers, cruising through the water using their large pectoral fins to let themselves glide, almost like a condor or a vulture would. Their long pectoral fins enable them to glide efficiently through the water, conserving energy while swimming. The large rounded dorsal fins provide stability, allowing them to maintain speeds without really exerting themselves, which is absolutely fascinating. Now let's get into more of the juicy stuff. One thing about these sharks is they are known as the scavengers of the sea, and this comes in large part that they're the first shark to show up at any shipwreck victim. Scientists now believe that this has been a learned behavior. For as long as humans have traveled the open seas, there have been shipwrecks. So we are talking over 600 to 1,000 years of people doing this. And these sharks have learned the behavior of boats and will follow them in open voyages. Basically what they're saying is just like our wolf episode, if you guys go back to what was it called? The Creature of Gévaudan?
Yes.
It talks about wolves and how wolves in France and Europe basically learn that people are easy pickings, and if you wait for a woman or a kid to basically lead astray a herd of sheep or something like that, instead of going for the sheep, just go for the kid. You could eat them, and they learn that behavior over time. What they're also saying is oceanic whitetip probably learned that ships need food.
Yeah.
And the reason that you see them now following ships always is because they've learned this over thousands of years. The shark is also very prominent for a movie called Jaws, where the main character, Quinn, tells a hair-raising story of the U.S. Indianapolis. Well, the main protagonist of that event, where over 1,100 men into the water and only 400 came out, was the oceanic whitetip that probably caused most of the killings. Mm-hmm. These sharks have no problem feeding on human beings non-provoked if they're in the water with them. Mm-hmm. So basically, if you're in the water with an oceanic whitetip, it will just eat you. It will do that. It looks at you as food. These sharks really come into contact with humans unless it's a sea disaster. However, there have been several attacks at Sharm el-Sheikh, which is in the Red Sea, where deep, strong ocean currents, maybe due to global warming, who the fuck knows there, basically brought these sharks in close to shore, where they were, what is that word? Haphazardly got into contact with humans. They killed 2 people. One of them, he ate his arm and his leg before he got in. So these things are nothing to mess with. You do not want to mess with an oceanic whitetip. And that kind of gets us into today's tale. This story, guys, it gets a little gruesome, so I apologize, but it's absolutely fun. Let me get my story up here. Time now for the tale of dark waters. Rod Temple and Robbie McVallen were waiting for me when I drove up to the beach at Cane Bay on St. Croix North Shore. This area of the Virgin Islands has some of the best wall diving in the Eastern Caribbean, and the drop-off was an easy swim from shore, eliminating a long boat ride from Christian Island. Virgin drop-off, basically it goes from like 10 feet to like 2,000 feet. Oh. And it's so close to actually shore, you can literally just swim to it. We unloaded our gear and began to dress under the shady palm while a dozen or so tourists watched with interest. Diving was still not an everyday sport for most people, and the doubled tank and underwater camera equipment held a certain fascination to the villagers. We were setting off to recover some samples from a collection experiment we had placed on the wall for a local marine science lab. 6 days before, we had positioned our large support float right over the top of the research vessel and carefully loaded our sediment traps, nets, lines, so forth. They'd be ready to go for positioning various locations on the Sea Patch Reef and the deep wall. Today, we plan to inspect one project at 210 feet and shoot some photography of the area. Rod transferred the dive profile and decompression information to his slate as Robbie and I rounded up the remainder of the equipment and walked into the warm ocean to begin our leisurely surface swim, to float the station about 300 yards offshore. We'd done Cane Bay hundreds of times in the last 2 years, both for work and for fun. And this October morning was no different than scores of others, as we snorkeled over the clear sand a few feet beneath our fins, while we wallowed in his wake, towing the photo gear and another pixel glass and sand trap the lab wanted to set up in chutes that spilled over the wall. Researching the float, Robbie retrieved the snap swivel that would anchor the trap into our rope gird strung onto the wall. But Rob reviewed the decoy schedule. Look, if we can get this thing set up and checked out the project at 210 in 15 minutes, we can save a lot of time decompression. And then just for a quick cut out of the story here, is basically decompression is basically you go so far down in the water that the blood oxygen level adjusts. Mm-hmm. And so if you go up too quickly, you'll get the bends, which means basically your blood explodes. Mm-hmm. So that's what that decompression, you need time to decompress. Yeah.
Okay. You can't go up fast.
You don't want to go too fast. Yeah. Bad things can sometimes happen. Can you do the photo in that time frame? If I run the lines on the plexel trays? Sure, I replied, but don't go wandering off in case Robbie needs help getting snaps in with the trap. That thing is effing crazy. No problem, Rod smiled back. I don't mind doing the heavy work for you lazy Yanks. His British enthusiasm belled the fact that Robbie and I were about twice his size and strength. Although he was older and more experienced, we both gave him an up yours salute, knowing full well that any heavy lifting always came our way while Rod handled the paperwork. As the timekeeper and dive leader, he would keep track of our dive profile, work in progress, remaining air status, and then run the decoy schedule. He eased away from the float and began to swim the short distance over the deep blue that marked the drop-off. The visibility was great, over 125 feet horizontally, and even better looking up and down. A mild swell wrapped around the point and the sea wall was calm. 2 of the Navy vessels that we worked with on submarine listening tests were just a few miles offshore, and we could hear their acoustic sound generating pings away off in the distance when we were underwater. Rod settled in on top of the wall at 100 feet, and we joined up to check gauges before slipping over in a gentle glide to the first workstation at 180 feet. Robbie rearranged the open ends of the trap to aim in the west quadrant this week, and I fired a photo or two to record the scene. Most of the scientists who contracted us didn't do much diving themselves, and they insisted on rims of photographs to prove what we did and to document what we are doing, so they could be accurately detailed of the conditions and the deep water zones that they were studying. Signaling that we were finished, Rod led over the coral, that's not succubus, that's different, buttress. How did I get succubus? The coral buttress, the lip, and came to rest next to the deep project. It had slid a bit deeper during the week, so Robbie and I eased it back into position and hoped it would stay put this time. This occupied our attention for up at most 10 minutes when Rod excitedly tapped me on the shoulder and pointed out the approach of 2 oceanic whitetips. This was nothing new to us as we dove with sharks routinely, but it was rare to see these 2 open water predators so close to shore and together. They're isolated creatures that usually never hunt alone.
Wait, they never hunt alone?
They usually hunt alone.
Oh.
Unless excited.
I thought you said they usually never hunt alone.
Yes. They passed within about 10 feet of us, and I shot a few photos as they swam off to the east. We finished up the required observation, and Rod filled out the field logs on his slate. Right on schedule, he indicated. We were going to get out with only about 20 minutes of decompression time needed. Robbie started up first and pointed out the sharks again as they swam by him, headed over the coral and down the sandy chute. Robbie started up first and pointed out the sharks again as they swam by him, headed over the coral and down into the sandy chute. I remember thinking how strange it was to see these oceanic white tips right here on the wall in Cane Bay. It was kind of like walking off your back porch and seeing an African lion when you were expecting an alley cat. We'd had a fair share of nasty encounters with white tips when we worked offshore. They frequently bit our equipment, the steel cables deployed from research vessels, and even the shafts and propellers on occasion.
Jeez.
We were convinced that they would bite us as well once they got going, and never turned our backs on them without another diver riding a shotgun. But these two didn't seem to pay us any attention and I turned to begin the ascent behind Robbie. Our plan called for Rob to be the last guy up. I rendezvoused.
Rendezvous?
I rendezvoused. There's a Z in there. Rendezvoused. Rendezvoused with Rendezvoused.
I believe so. I don't know. I'd have to see it.
I rendezvoused with Robbie at about 175 feet, just over the ledge, and we both rested on the coral to wait for him to join us. He was late, and Robbie fidgeting, pointing to his pressure gauge, not wanting to run low on air. I shrugged and gave him the "what am I supposed to do about it" look, and we continued to wait. Suddenly, Robbie dropped his extra gear and catapulted himself towards the wall, pointing at a massive bubble exhaust coming from deeper water. We both figured that Rod had some sort of air failure, either at the manifold of his at his double tank or a regulator. Since my air consumption was low, I decided to send Robbie up, and I would go see if Rod needed help. As I descended into the cloud of bubbles, Robbie gave me an anxious okay sign, and he started up. But when I reached Rod, things were about as bad as they could get. One of the sharks had bitten him on the left thigh without provocation, and blood and human material was gushing in the green cloud that was created when the iron contents of your blood mixed with salt water. I was horrified and couldn't believe my eyes. He was desperately trying to beat off the 12-foot animal with his leg and keep from sinking deeper into the abyss. I had no idea where the second shark was, and I lunged to grab his right shoulder harness strap to pull him up. Almost simultaneously, the second shark hit Rod in the same leg, and it bit him savagely. I could see Rod desperately gouging at the shark's eyes and gills as he grimly fought to beat off the attacker. With my free hand, I blindly punched at the reeling torso of the animal as they tore great chunks of flesh from him. My friend, in flashes of open jaws, teeth, and blood, locked in mortal combat. We both beat at the sharks in frantic panic, and then they suddenly let go. I dragged Rod up the sand chute, half walking, half swimming, pleading. Once clear of the silt, I could see Robbie about 100 feet above us, looking at us, horrified. He started down to us as I lifted Rod off the bottom and kicked with all my might towards the surface. But in less than 15 seconds, the first shark returned, and it hit him again, and it began to tow us back to the bottom and off the ledge. The attack had probably only lasted minutes, but it felt like a lifetime at this point. But Rod had lost a huge amount of blood, and tissue had gone limp in my grasp. I was still behind him, clutching his right harness strap as the second larger shark hit him again on the opposite side, down around his left calf. Like the other, the shark bit and hung on as we tumbled, all four of us, down the wall face. We were dropping rapidly, now completely out of control. My effort to kick up were fruitless as the sharks continued to bite and tear into my friend, all the while dragging us deeper into the abyss. I felt Rod move again to fend off another attack, and my hopes soared upon realizing that he was still alive and conscious. I clung briefly to the edge of the drop-off while I held the harness in my other hand, holding the weight of my friend and the two predators. The coral outcropping gave us some slight protection. As for a moment the attack stopped, they released, and they vanished. Both sharks retreated into the dark blue, and I watched them circle our position from about 10 feet away. To my horror, I saw one of the sharks swallow the remains of Rod's lower leg. I said that wrong. To my horror, I saw one of the sharks swallow the remains of Rod's lower left leg right before my eyes. The other gulped a mouthful of flesh it had torn off. I tried to push Rod into the coral in an effort to shield him from another attack, but there was nothing to afford any shelter. As I turned away from the waiting predators, Rod and I came face to face for the first time during the attack. He shook his head weakly, and he tried to push me away multiple times. I grabbed for his wrist harness for a new grip, and I felt my hand sink into his mutilated torso with intestines spewing. There was no harness left to reach for. He had been disemboweled. Shrieking into my mouthpiece, almost drowning, in a fury of piss and hate, I pulled him from the coral and took off, pumping for the surface with him clutched to my chest. Immediately the sharks were on us again. I felt the larger one actually force me to one side as it savagely sought to return to the wounds it had already created. In a minute, we were covered in this greenish plume of blood and salt water. Rod screamed for the last time as a second shark seized him by the midsection and shook violently. The blue water turned now a torpid black red. Once we were turned completely over, I felt Rod tear away from my grip. I watched his lifeless body drift into the abyss with both sharks still hitting him. The attack had started around 200 feet, and now my death gauge was pegged at 325. Now, but I knew we were far deeper than that. The grimness of my own situation forced itself on me, though. A fog of necrosis and exertion. That's when I ran out of air. I think that subconsciously I almost decided to stay there and die. It seemed so totally hopeless, and my strength was completely zapped. But I put my head back and put all my muscles into a wide, steady power kick for the surface. I forced all thoughts to maintain the kick cycle while pulling myself forward. After what seemed like an eternity, I sneaked a look at my depth gauge. It was still pegged at 325 feet. I sucked hard on the regulator, got one good breath in it. Not much, but enough oxygen to my starved brain. I prayed my legs would get me up shallow enough to get another breath before the effects of oxygen deprivation shut down my whole body. There is really no way to describe what it's like to slowly have your brain starve of oxygen, in combination with the adrenaline-induced survival instincts when you watch your friend get eaten alive out of your own hands. But I remember thinking if I could just concentrate on kicking, I could make it. After a while, though, the sense of urgency faded, and I remember looking for the surface through a red haze that gradually closed down into a tunnel before I passed out. The panic was gone, and I went to sleep thinking, damn, I almost made it. I woke up on the surface, reaching and expelling huge belches of expanded air. Apparently, the small volume of air that I had in my safety vest I wore had enough to float me the rest of the way to the surface and save my life. But I still had to deal with an unknown amount of a minute decompression sickness, and certainly that I was severely bent, the bends, with too much oxygen in the blood. Swimming to shore as fast as I could, I felt my legs going numb, By the time I reached the beach, I could barely stand. A couple on their honeymoon waded out and dragged me up on the sand. I gasped out instructions to get the oxygen unit from our van, and I collapsed. In an incredible burst of good fortune, it turned out that the wife was an ER nurse from Florida and understood pathology of decompression sickness. They got a steady flow of oxygen into me, and they ran to call the emergency number that I directed her to call on the clipboard. I drifted back again into unconsciousness as I was medevaced out to Puerto Rico. But the Navy chamber was down, and it was decided to take me to the other functional units up on the island's northwest corner, nearly 200 miles further away. But the flight crew was afraid I wouldn't make it when we ran low on oxygen shortly after passing San Juan. So they had the police stop traffic on the main divide highway and landed on the road where I was awaited by Coast Guard helicopters. They snatched me away to the hospital roof. 2 days later, I was released, but the resident numbness in my arms and legs, substantial hearing loss, and permanent blindness in both my eyes. Robbie's last view was where we've been dragged over the wall into a cloud of blood, and so reported us both killed when he got to shore. So basically, it's Robbie, the friend that went up first. And so Robbie said, last view of Rod and me was as we dragged over the wall in a cloud of blood by the sharks. He never saw me free or ascend to the surface, so he reported us both dead. It was not until I called my dad from the hospital that he knew I had survived. A week later, we had Rob's memorial service at that beach. In interviews to this day, they asked me what the worst part of the ordeal was, and I would tell them that it was the loss of my sight. Most of the reporters never believed me, like, how could that be the worst thing? And I tell them to this day, it's because the last thing I ever got to see was my friend slowly sinking into the abyss as the world got dark around me. And that was the tale of Dark Waters.
You really don't want me to get into the ocean when I go to the Bahamas, do you? You did this on purpose.
Did you like that story?
You're like, oh, she gets to go on vacation without me. I'm going to make sure she doesn't get in the water.
So guys, this was actually pulled from the Shark Attack files. This is a real story. This was his written account of it. Yeah. And I thought the eeriest part of that was like, well, how do you know this in so much detail? And this is the part that I smudged a little bit just to cut it down. But he basically said, like, I remember this in detail because it's the last thing I literally ever got to see. Mm-hmm. And so he said, like, that's basically burnt into his brain.
Right.
Because when he said the thing's got like the dark tunnels was because his eyes exploded because of decompression.
Oh, wow.
And so I think that's really kind of like, fuck. Like that was literally the last thing you saw was that horrific thing. And now you're stuck with that forever. Mm-hmm. So apparently, I guess updates is like he did get some laser surgery. So now he's like can kind of see. Not like great anymore. But again, this was in 1972 when this happened. So things have improved. But the fact is like, yeah. So aftermath, this attack is in 1972 was widely reported and shark experts speculated the oceanic whitetip may have been attracted and then stimulated by the low frequency sound in the water from the nearby submarine tests. I think that's bullshit. But anyway,
they're just hungry.
The previous deepest depth that a diver survived a free ascent from was 180 feet. This was 300.
Over 300.
Over 300.
Because it's like odometer reading thing.
Yeah. Gilliam was probably closer to 400 is what this thing says. He was cited for heroism by the Virgin Island government for risking his own life to try to save his partner. Mm-hmm. In 1993, British television producer produced a special on the incident as part of its series called Dead Men's Tales. I was trying to find some footage of that. Probably find it tonight to show her. But I couldn't actually find anything about that.
Wow.
Brett Gilliam was a professional diver involved in diving industry for 35 years and retired after this event. He dived over 17,000 times.
Wow. And that was his first shark attack?
Yeah. And then I will show you a clip.
That's impressive.
I'm going to show you a clip of this real quick.
That he lasted that long without a shark attack, just saying.
South African man dies in shark attack. Oof. Navy ship will be holed open. So yeah, I just thought, sometimes guys, the scariest stories are actually the real ones. And dark waters, this one's the scariest because it shows you the power of these creatures, and especially ones like that, the oceanic white tip, where it's consuming, it's hunting, it's eating. And I'm not saying you should kill them all, but they are predators. And I really get sick and tired of people on the side, like, you got to make sure that you protect humans too. It's something else I complain about the alligator laws. Like, if an alligator kills your grandmother, you're not allowed to shoot it. It's like, it's protected. It's like, well, can we care about human lives too? Like, there's a reason we don't have wolves in the lower 48, and it's because we learned a long time ago
to protect ourselves.
We got to protect ourselves, and they're bringing them back into Colorado, and the farmers are getting upset. Like, yeah, we have cattle and dogs disappearing now. It's like, yeah, because you just brought back an alpha predator. Let's have them, but let's also understand that they are alpha predators, and we need to have balance.
They can go to their little oasis and chill, but they can't attack people.
And the last note of today on the last scary thing in the news, this is more like a little update. That horrific shark attack that happened last year in Australia, a man that was killed in Sydney Harbor. Remember the video that I showed you?
Yeah.
It was, the government there listed it as a provoked attack because people were fishing. So they're saying that the shark was actually provoked into eating the guy. That's created a lot of uproar because it was originally said that it was like unprovoked.
What about that school teacher in the Bahamas last year?
Yeah, that jumped off a cruise ship, got killed by a bull shark.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting, like the law thing, because like the fact that they waited so long to switch it around, and there's like the guys are fishing, like this guy was brutally killed.
Right.
This shark knew what it was doing. Period of story.
Pieces.
And ate him. And there is footage of it. If you'd like to go find it on Reddit, places like that. Very graphic, by the way. Very graphic.
You can't really see a lot.
It's enough
it's really
to be graphic.
far in the distance, and the footage is not.
And shows you that dead bodies really do look fake.
Yeah.
That's the creepiest part when you look at a lot of this stuff too. Like the hand, that one I showed you about the shark. It doesn't look real.
No.
And that's really creepy.
But it's real.
But your brain is almost like...
No. My brain was just like, when I saw that, I was like, because like you could tell it's real.
But you can also like, you want to know it's fake. Like in my brain, like there's this fight, like part of you 100%
like,
know it's real.
It's got to be fake because it can't be that gruesome.
Yeah.
Kind of deal.
Yeah, because like you think it should be worse.
Yeah.
And then when you saw like the shark consuming that body, it's like, should be worse. Anyway, not to get too into the weeds with this, I'm trying to keep it PG-13 as best I can. The point is like that attack was clearly a predatory attack. It's a predator. Predators are predators. Mm-hmm. Like, why are we covering for them? They're predators.
Right.
Respect them. Understand that. Be careful when you guys go in the water. Happy 75 episodes. Carly, I think you're going to enjoy the Bahamas. I think it's really good. I think he's got to be careful.
I'm not getting in the ocean, that's for sure.
I think he's got to be careful on where you go into the water.
I'm not getting in the ocean. I might swim with the baby pigs, but that's about it.
Ah, yeah. You get eaten with the pigs. That'd be good. Bacon. What is it called? Like pigs in a blanket? White woman and pigs.
No.
White woman and sausage. We'll see you guys next time on Spirits and Ghost Stories. Bye.